Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. This is Frank with the Department of State Treasurer. Welcome to the November edition of Ask Me Anything with Treasurer Folwell. Thank you all for joining us, Treasurer. Go ahead and do your introductory remarks.
Thank you all for joining us. We know this is Election Day across North Carolina and many of our communities, and know that people are working on that. I think Frank and our communications team put out the Ask Me Anything invitation about some subjects that might be hot on people's minds right now. So with that, I'll start with questions.
Great. Who would like to ask the first question? Will, are you on the phone? Who do we have on the phone today?
This is Gary.
Gary Robertson?
That's right.
Hey, Gary, how are you? Long time no see.
Yeah.
Are you just monitoring, or you got a question?
Well, I just wanted to hear if you wanted to just kind of, if the treasurer just wanted kind of to describe the what led them to make such a direct statement about the DOT secretary last week. I mean, I know he made it clear in his statement last week. I just wanted to hear from his own lips why he felt like it was important to call out Secretary Trogdon.
Thank you, Gary. My answer to that question is that for over a year, we have been bringing it up in the Council of State meetings as we were issuing bonds, as we were trying to issue bonds, as we were preparing to issue bonds, both the Garvey and the Build-In C bonds, of our concern regarding the fact that the Department of Transportation was speeding, meaning it was spending money too quickly. When they were told they were speeding, they didn't slow down, and when they started to slow down, they didn't slow down enough. And the result of that is that taxpayers, road contractors, and others, the roads themselves, are harmed from this lack of accountability and cash management. It's really important that when we issue these bonds, which we have done more of than any other state treasurer in a short period of time, that we need to make sure that when we go to the disclosure councils and we put things in books like this, that we feel very confident that we're accurate in what we're saying. On top of this, this isn't about people. It's about personnel being the keeper of the public purse and actually solving problems. And we feel like that the governor needs to manage his DOT, and the number one thing that can be done, and it all stays under the governor inside the executive branch, is to transfer the financial operations of DOT to the Office of State Management Budget. The people who build the roads, who repair the roads, they need to be world-class at what they do, but the people that control the spigot also need to be under a separate department under the governor called Office of State Budget and Management. So that's the
Treasurer,
yes.
Go ahead and finish your thought, and I have a follow-up.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gary.
Okay, I'm sorry, Treasurer. The question I have is, have you, when you've issued these Garvey bonds and other transportation bonds, have you gotten some negative feedback from the bond rating houses about the finances of DOT? And is it negatively reflected in the interest rates?
Okay. The number one, the Build-In C bonds, because they were not approved by the voters of North Carolina, will never achieve the top AAA interest grade that we always talk about, because they're not voter approved. Secondly, not the rating agencies themselves, but as our bond counsel, which we hire outside bond counsel to scrub these deals, as they were meeting with DOT leading up to the first issue of the build-in-C bonds, they talked to them about the seriousness of not fully disclosing any transfers of money that had gone on. And it's my recollection, Gary, that the next morning there was a call back to us and said, we need to talk about these transfers out of the Highway Trust Fund. Just to remind you, there, generally speaking, have been no loans out of the Highway Trust Fund in the last 15 years, and I have the table that I'm holding up right here in front of me to demonstrate that. But over the last 12 months, there's been over $1 billion of loans out of the Highway Trust Fund with no schedule to pay them back. And this is in addition to the Garvey bonds. This is in addition to the build-in-C bonds. And we have responsibilities to keep with the public purse to make sure that we follow the process and that we're fully disclosing what's going on. And I feel like the answer to this is the people who build the roads need to build the roads, but the Office of State Management Budget needs to control the spigot.
Gary, you can give it a follow-up if you want. Go ahead.
I'm fine, thank you.
I'll just add before we go to the next question is that you can read from some of the documents that are out there regarding the Department of Transportation. I think nearly every DOT district in North Carolina overspent its budget by tens of millions of dollars. Every single one. We have been told that one reason that occurred is that they were given an annual budget and they were told contractors and other folks to keep stepping on the gas, and they basically spent their year allowance in maybe 3 or 4 months. And that's why we have this cash crisis that we're dealing with currently. And I'll say before we go to the next question, for anyone to ask anybody to change the people at the top of organization, I mean, nobody skips to work thinking about these issues. But this is one of the largest expenditures in the state of North Carolina, and taxpayers deserve better.
Gary, if you feel like you need to follow up before the end of the call, you're more than welcome to, but we'll go ahead and take another call. Does somebody else have a call for Treasurer Folwell? An answer, a question?
Yes.
Go ahead. Please state your name, who you are as well.
Yes, this is Blaine Tollison with WSOC in Charlotte. Thank you for taking my question. This is a little off topic, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to use the opportunity to ask you about the police retirement situation, and this relates to our chief planning to retire and discussion of him coming back in earlier in October. Mr. Folwell, you had said that you want to sit down and talk with people at the city of Charlotte giving this advice to explain why this is not acceptable. Have you had a chance to talk to folks in Charlotte and made a plan moving forward regarding retiring with a plan to come back?
Thank you, and don't apologize. That's why we call it Ask Me Anything. You can ask anything you like, anytime.
Well, thank you.
One time we got a question about the dredging in Dare County, so don't feel like any subject's off topic. As you can imagine, it's impossible to talk about personnel issues with people who are not yet retired. We had no idea this was going on until we started getting flooded with calls the next morning, actually by the media in Charlotte, asking us, is this proper? Before that moment in time, the next day, we had no idea that this implied or expressed or written intent to violate the policy was in place. And let me say that this, once again, is not about any individual person. It's about the tax-exempt status of the plan itself. Contrary to what may have been reported, this is an IRS regulation that mandates how people are allowed to return to work. It's very, very simple, and it applies to the local system and the state system. Number one, there has to be a timeout period. Number two, if there's a timeout period, there's terms called return to work and return to service. Once you come back, there is a limitation on the amount of money you can make and the number of hours you work. And number three, more specific to your question, is that from the moment that we started getting information about this, we have been reaching out to the city of Charlotte. That resulted, now we're 3 weeks away from this, that resulted this week in us sending out a certified letter trying for the third time to receive a copy of their internal policies regarding this matter. We do not have the ability to investigate a plan that has 900,000 participants in it. What we're hoping is that the city of Charlotte will share with us what their policies are on this, and to make sure that this is not standard operating procedure across the city as a whole. And we would be applying this whether it was a deputy sheriff, a DOT worker, or somebody who worked in the treasurer's office. There are very specific rules regarding this. There was a mention earlier about, this is some codification of this law took place in 2013. All that was a technical correction just to synchronize the differences in what the IRS and the federal government say and what the state law said. That's all that was. That generally speaking, these return to work policies have been the policies of the treasurer's office, as far as I can tell, all the way back to the mid-70s.
Blaine, you have a follow-up?
Yes, and if Charlotte continues to not provide the documentation you've requested, is there a next course of action?
Well, we hope that's not the case. What we're hoping is that they are going to give us what we've asked for, and that we can have conversations with them about whether this has affected anyone else who is retired from the city of Charlotte in any capacity, and for them not to make us discover what's going on, but actually disclose to us how we're going to get it right, keep it right for the future.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Blaine. Does anyone else have a question for Treasurer Folwell?
Treasurer, this is Dave Mildenberg down in Charlotte. The legislature was asked by the business community to step up on this cash funding crisis back in September. I'm not, as someone doesn't pay close attention enough, was there any action on the legislature's part to fill some of the spending?
Thank you, Dave. There was a bill introduced. There were competing ideas going on in the General Assembly, especially in the House. There was a bill introduced, but that bill did not pass the legislature. It's my understanding that in the adjournment resolution that there is a possibility of doing a deeper dive into this issue in January. This is very cyclical. There are times when the DOT should be minting money, so to speak, where their cash balances should be going up, and there are times that their cash balances should be going down. And given the fact that we're in North Carolina, from the mountains to the sea, and just the differences in the climate, you can pretty much figure out when cash balances are going up and when cash balances are supposed to be going down. And what we've observed for over a year is that when the cash balances were supposed to be going up, they weren't. And when the cash balances were going down, they were going down more than anticipated.
Dave, you got a follow-up?
Was there a discussion of this at the Council of State this morning?
There was not a discussion of this. I have brought this up in meetings with at least a dozen people, in every one of these meetings with Secretary Trogdon. It became a very important, there was a very important moment back in the almost a year ago now, where they were trying to get these bonds, the first build-in-C bonds, to market, and every time they presented us a detail of where the money was actually going, the projects were changing. And so we never could get it nailed down in order to go to the rating agencies and the underwriters, we never could get it nailed down about actually where the money is going, which is a very important piece of one of these documents here. So, and we went on for weeks, and we went on for months, and finally, as we were getting toward the end of the fiscal year, we told them that if we don't get this, if we don't go buy the eggs and the flour and the cake mixed in order to put this, get this out the door, we can't get it in the oven in time. If we can't get it in the oven before the end of the fiscal year, then there's going to be a problem. So our staff, and by the way, in case this has been lost on anybody, the subject matter experts who are advising me on this deal are the exact same subject matter experts who worked for the previous treasurer. This is not a difference of philosophy. This is not a different interpretation of what the statute says. These are the exact same people who worked for the previous treasurer. And I trust them, not only as subject matter experts, but as individuals. And so to go back to this point, we've been dealing with this for a very long period of time. And at the end of the day, in addition to all the disclosures and everything that have to occur in order for us to get a bond out of the oven so that we can go to market, all this stuff has to come together. And we've had an extremely difficult time. And I will say that part of that difficulty stems back to the fact that these bonds were not voter approved. When you don't have voter approved bonds, you could never achieve a AAA bond rating, number one. And number two, the projects that you go to the voters with is exactly where you have to spend the money. And that's true in the city of Winston-Salem, the county of Forsyth, or the state of North Carolina. So these are very serious issues when you start looking at the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that we're talking about over a very short period of time.
Dave, any other follow-up?
No, thanks.
Great. Would someone else like to ask Treasurer Folwell a question? Hearing no other questions, Treasurer, would you like to?
Hi. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
This is Liz Mooney with the Salisbury Post. I was just calling to see if there's any updates on Landis. I think they have been able to finish their forensic audit, so I didn't know if there's any correspondence updates that you have.
Hey Liz, how are you?
Good.
I will, the local government commission is meeting today, and we're writing a note to contact you before 2 o'clock today, where I can ask the folks that have been more specifically working on the situation in Landis, North Carolina, the irregularities in Landis, North Carolina, can respond back to you with a more specific answer. All I know about Landis is what people are sending me through emails of articles that you've written. So I will ask our subject matter experts about this certified audit, but if I was going to try to get the information about what's going on in Landis, I'd probably pick up the phone and call you. So.
Okay. No.
Alternatively, Liz, I'll check in with the state and local government to get back with you.
Yeah.
Okay. And could you...
Liz, before we go, is that election today?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Good. All right. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
And another thing is, I know one of our other reporters, Siobhan, emailed about East Spencer and some correspondence that you've had with that town. Would you mind following up with me or her as well? Yeah, thank you.
Everybody's shrugging their shoulders. Is this something that you sent in to us and we didn't respond to?
What was it? She got some response. We can follow up after the phone call.
Okay, good.
No problem.
Yeah,
We will. We'll take Sean. We'll be in touch.
Yeah, you apologize to her because that's not our style.
Yeah.
No, I mean there's a lot of things going on, but we try to be really responsive to everybody on this call because they have a job to do, and our responsibility is to help them do those jobs.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Anybody else on the call with a question? Give you a chance to unmute, ask it.
Hi, my name's Julie. I'm calling in from the Carolina Journal.
Hey,
I was
Julie.
hoping to talk to you about the MAP Act. The Department of Transportation has credited the MAP Act for most of that overspending. Would you mind talking a little bit about the situation with the MAP Act and how much that actually accounts for?
Julie, the short answer is we don't know. Let me just tell you as a point of history that the MAP Act was requested by the Department of Transportation several decades ago. So it was requested by the Department of Transportation in 1986. So what I've observed in Forsyth County is people whose property has been tied up for decades because of this thing called the MAP Act, where if there's any improvement that needed to be done to their property that required a permit, it was even difficult for them to even live in these houses while they were waiting for the DOT to buy them from them. Go to eastern or western, especially eastern Forsyth County, and talk to the people who are actually in those right-of-way areas. The MAP Act may be a fantastic idea as it was originally intended, but when the court came out and put an interest rate, by the way, that's 4 times higher than what the Treasury bond is selling for right now. When they put an interest rate on the compounding of the MAP Act, that means that every right-of-way purchase, if you use the rule of 72, every right-of-way purchase doubles in value in cost to the state every 9 years. So if a right-of-way was going to cost the state $1,000, 9 years later, because of this interest, it's $2,000. And then the rule of 72 says that 9 years after that, the cost is not 3, it's 4. And then if it were to happen, there's 9 years after that, the cost is 8. This is what has happened with this thing called the MAP Act. Secondly, the reserving for the initial cost of this property, and I'm not the MAP Act expert, and there are people around the state, especially in Winston-Salem, who are. The original cost of this property was supposed to be just the cost of right-of-way. We understand the additional value that judges decided they should pay. We understand this interest rate that people decided that the court said that the DOT should pay. We understand the attorney's fees that go on top of all that. But it's a great question that needs to be answered about how much is associated with the MAP Act, number one. We still don't have that information. Number two, and how much of that money was for the original right-of-way, which should never be a point of contention about when you're going and asking for hundreds of millions in bailouts.
Julie, you got follow-up?
And Julie, I just want to say, if you go to some of the public documents, in this disclosure document for the build-in C bond, I think if I'm correct, the chief operating officer of the DOT said to bond counsel that the MAP Act was not going to be a financial problem. And then just 30 days later said that this was going to be potentially $1 billion liability. This is what I'm talking about, really going back to Gary's original question of how important it is to get the right information. And I can tell you as an accountant, if something is estimable and something is probable, then we need to be extra conservative in how we report that, either to rating agencies, bond counsel, or the taxpayers in North Carolina.
Julie, follow-up?
Yes, actually, the Department of Transportation has credited, again, that MAP Act and disasters as the reason for the overspend. You have implied that it's more poor management. Would you mind responding at least a little bit to the, I guess there are the argument that it's the disasters are to blame for that overspend?
Well, which disaster? Because this all gets very complicated when you're asking for FEMA reimbursement from the federal government. All I know is what I've recently read regarding, I guess it was Hurricane Dorian, where the state put in a request for money for the damages that a hurricane caused. That request was denied, which I've never heard that of that before. And then it wasn't appealed. So what does that tell you about the conviction of whatever the original application was? If it was A, denied, secondly, not appealed, that to me, if I were in your shoes, would lead to more questions. Listen, whether the acts of God that have hit the state of North Carolina have been tremendous, especially over the last 20 years. And, you know, a lot of the flood damage and storm damage that we've occurred, like from ice, has not been in the mountains. It's a lot of it has, but it's been up the I-85 corridor. It's been all over the place. But the fact is that the amount of bailout that the DOT is asking for does not add up when they continue to blame it on the MAP Act, which they've known about for 30 years. And when they continue to blame it on storms, which some of it should have been reserved already. I mean, that's how you run a business. And it would have been cleaner for them to come back and say, listen, this is how much we had in our savings account. This is how much we had in reserve for storms. And that's how all of us run our households. That's how people run their businesses. They simply reserve for things like of this nature. But to sit there and ask for hundreds of millions of bailout after they've borrowed money from the Highway Trust Fund with no schedule to repay it, first time in 15 years, after we've issued almost $1 billion worth of bonds over the last 12 months. I mean, as I said earlier, these just don't compute. And that's why it's very important for the financial management of the Department of Transportation that's in the executive branch to be transferred to another part of the governor's executive branch, which is the Office of State Management and Budget.
Julie, you have more?
No, that'll be it. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Heard a number of people sound like they got off. Does anybody else have any questions that's still on the call?
Hey, Treasurer, how's your arm?
Who is this?
How's your arm feeling, Treasurer?
Who is this?
It's Gary.
Oh, thank you, Gary. I'm very lucky, and I've beat all the odds by not having this happen for 45 years, and then I've further beat the odds by being very compliant with what my doctor told me to do, and and wife and friends and family. So we are. I've been on the job from the morning after this happened. I've attended every meeting either through conference call or physically. This is my 2.5 week physically back in Raleigh, and it just demonstrates to me and to everybody on this call that as the keeper of the public purse, it's always going to be bigger than any one individual. And I appreciate the job that the team has done in the state health plan as we're in the middle of open enrollment as we speak, actually. The job that's going on in the investment management division. Unclaimed property just had its biggest 2 weeks ever in the history of North Carolina, associated with our exposure at the state fair, where for the first time, by the way, Gary, typically when people go to the state fair, they looked up their name on that computer and they filled out a piece of paper. We've upgraded this system for the first time in a quarter of a century, and people are actually able to file their claim without a piece of paper. So that's resulted, and I think we've already paid out $500,000 in the first few days after the state fair. So a long answer to your question about the arm, but I still am where I was before the accident, and that is that I have somebody to love, and I have something to do, and I have something to look forward to every day, and that's all a person can really ask for.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Gary. Thanks for asking. Anybody else have a question about Treasurer's arm or anything else? Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us. Treasurer, I know you have some closing comments.
Well, I had already decided, going to Gary's question, that that was my last race. And the reason I want to go up there, as many of you who are involved in scouting know, that there's something in the United States called Philmont. And the Boy Scouts of America have built Philmont of the East. It's actually in Beckley, West Virginia. And they actually had the Grand National Cross Country race, first time ever on that particular property. And I wanted to participate in that. And I'm saying all that to you in light of the fact that that we continue to focus on figuring out what's right and getting it right and keeping it right at the Treasurer's office. And in addition to no more motorcycle racing, which I had already decided before that race, there will be no more arm wrestling either. So there's one guy who trains all the time sitting here in this conference room right now who his rematch that he's been asking me for will never take place. So anyway, thank you for your interest, and appreciate you all joining us on this call.
Thank you all, and as usual, if there have any follow-ups or any other questions, the Communications Department is always willing to work with you all. And thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next December. Thank you.